Hi, I'm John Sauvé, and this is Art and Design. Today my guest is Gene Jenneman from the Dennos Museum up in Traverse City. Gene, I want to take off from our previous conversation, which is bringing public art to Traverse City through the Dennos Museum. How did that all transpire?
Well, it starts for me, as I said, when I came to work on the designs and building of what becomes the Dennos Museum Center with Bob Holdeman, the architect. But I had a lot of free time during that, and so I needed something else to do. And there was a funding program that came through the state that helped support public art for buildings on campuses and so on. And so we commissioned a work with Marcia Wood from Kalamazoo, and that began what would become a public art collection, later acquiring or commissioning other works. And the David Barr, we did a piece with him, Lois Teichert, Susanna Lindberg, and as the major work, not that the others aren't significant, obviously, was with Clement Meadmore. That was facilitated with Donald and Florence Morris and their gallery. So that put art across the campus. We've also commissioned other works with Sally Rogers, who is an alum of the college, who's gone on to a very successful career in art and sculpture, and pleased to have a work by her now on the campus as well. But that, and now Traverse City has gone on to commission other works of public art. It's always controversial putting public art out. I never experienced that, though, on the campus. You know, again, you live in your world, and as long as you sort of stay in your world, it's okay. You know, when you start to move out into the public part of the world, which is off of the campus, then public art can sometimes become controversial. But we've had great success with it, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to build that collection. I hope, you know, over time it will continue. But now Traverse City is commissioning public art also, which is a great thing for the community. You know, going on from there.
Well, just real quick, I want to clarify. The program you're talking about with the state was when we had a percent for art through the Art in Public Places program through the state of Michigan. That's who you were working with, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Ray Scott, I think, was there probably
I
at the
think
time.
that was the case at the time. The other big jump in that came when, under the Engler administration, and the Michigan Council for the Arts was flush with money, which is a wonderful thing to be able to say.
Was that the right administration you're talking about?
Yes, actually it is. I was on the State Arts Council Board. He appointed me to the State Arts Council Board. There was a program for special funding, and we applied for funding to add 4 major works to the collection. And Clement Meadmore was one of those works, but we had already had a donor in Joanne Zimmerman, who, there was a section of land just south of the museum that needed to be, the road needed to be moved and a few things, but she had the vision of sculpture there and had offered us a significant sum of money. And then adding with the grant program, it allowed us to commission the work by Meadmore, who actually came to the campus and looked at the site and designed the piece for that location, and was there when it was installed. It was quite an experience. But so.
Well, and you've done a great job. The campus has major pieces throughout that are serve as a lot of different things, as public art, as wayfinding, as destinations within the campus. It's an amazing job.
Yeah, it's It's something that I'm pleased to have had an opportunity to do for the campus. But then we did open the museum on July 6th of 1991, which was Marcia and mine's 17th wedding anniversary. And she has often said that the museum became my first wife for a long time after that. One of the things that I really believed about the Dennos, and it also goes back to my days at the Besser, you don't put these great buildings in a community and then only use them to show the community, artists from the community and so on. I believe the idea is to bring the rest of the world to the community and use these facilities as the vehicle to do that. That doesn't mean you don't show regional artists. We certainly did. And we built a collection for the museum that has regional artists and international artists, and when they're hanging on the walls in the gallery, if you don't read the labels, you don't know who's who, but they all stand up well together. And I think that's one of the things I'm proudest about in terms of having then built the collection for the Dennos, which is, another story. We had the good fortune in '93, after we opened, the Detroit Institute of Arts sent up the Van Gogh self-portrait, which was a really big deal for the community. Thousands of people showed up over a few days that it was there. An armed guard stood in front of this piece, which added a little bit to the drama of it all, because back then the Japanese were buying Impressionist art and the value was skyrocketing. And one of the things that Paul Welch, who was chair of the art department and really was the instigator for the museum to begin with, said one day there will be art in the museum of greater value than the whole campus. It didn't quite happen with the Van Gogh, but it did happen a few years later, in 1997, a little before that. I was approached by one of the registrars at the Detroit Institute of Arts at a museums conference. She said, we're going to be closing the modern galleries. They were going to do this big Egyptian exhibitions and then renovate the galleries. And she said, we're thinking about putting some of the pieces from the modern collection in museums around the state. And would you want some? And I looked at her and I said, no, I want it all. I said, why would you spread out these pieces? A lot of downstate museums already have works by the same artists. But I said, bring the whole collection to Traverse City, or as much of the collection as we can, put it in the Dennos. And the people in northern Michigan never get to see this unless they purposely make trips to major cities that have these museums. And then again, probably they may not take that opportunity. And so here's an opportunity really to expose, introduce a population center, which is really all of northern Michigan, to this wonderful collection. They agreed to do that. It cost $60,000 to bring it there, but we raised the money and did it, and put the modern collection in an exhibition that was called Picasso to Warhol. And it was there about 5 months, and there was not one day when schools were open that we did not have school groups in the building, and they came from as far away as Sault Ste. Marie and Alpena to see that amazing collection. And I have to say, it looked fabulous in the building, but the greatest satisfaction was I had the Louise Nevelson wall spread across the back of the McFarland Gallery. So that letter to Fred Cummings years ago, as I referenced in our earlier discussion, wanting to bring the Nevelson to the Besser, finally, the Nevelson came north. And it was a very satisfying thing. Before that, I met Charles McGee, and I knew of his work, and he was turning 70 years old, and I wanted to do an exhibition with him. I went to visit him in his studio here down on 8 Mile. I walked in, and there's a wall all full of pockmarks. And I turned around and looked, and there's a golf driving pad. And Charles was a golfer, and he drove balls from one side of his studio into the wall at the other side. So at that time, I was introduced in playing golf, and so that was kind of a nice experience in itself. But we invited Charles to exhibit, and then I went to the DIA, and I knew the curatorial staff there was very interested in Charles also, and so it became a collaboration between the two of us to do the Charles McGee Seeing 70. And we opened it at the Dennos, and then it went to the Detroit Institute of Arts. And for me, from an ego standpoint, sending an exhibition to the DIA was a satisfying thing, but it was really a collaboration, and I very much appreciate the fact that they were willing to do that with us. Our 10th anniversary came along, and we had booked an exhibition of Egyptian art with a museum in California to come for our 10th anniversary. And we had it all set, and we'd raised $40,000 to do the exhibit with support from AT&T at the time. And I walked by the fax machine, and I picked out a fax, and this was like maybe 5 months before the exhibit was supposed to open, and we're canceling the tour. So I had money, and I had no exhibit. And I had been working with Bill Peck at the DIA. We were going to borrow the Book of the Dead and a few things from the DIA's collection for the exhibition as well. And I told him what had happened, and he contacted David Silverman at the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania. They had just taken a big Egyptian exhibition off tour, and I went out right after Christmas after getting this and met with David, and within a week we had reconstructed an exhibition, and we went on to have a very successful Egyptian exhibit. But it presented an opportunity for us to work with the University of Pennsylvania, and I went on to do borrow their Chinese collection of bronzes that they had on tour at one point. And while I was in the gallery at the museum picking out things for the exhibition we were going to do on 6,000 years of Chinese art, they had a jade book that was it rewrote the lineage or of the emperor to make him emperor. It had to have the right, and so this book apparently, did what was necessary so he could become emperor. And so we're going to borrow this book, and so I'm taken into the vault where this book is, and the collections manager takes me in to see it, and there on a rolling cart was the Ram in the Thicket, which comes out of the excavations of Ur that the University of Pennsylvania and the British Museum did in about 1920 in Ur in Mesopotamia, the Sumerian art from a burial excavation. And there were two of these sculptures, this Ram in the Thicket, which sort of, it sort of referenced back to Abraham and sacrifice of his son, but it really had nothing to do with that. But it's a similar kind of look. And I saw that, and it's an icon in ancient art history. I mean, any art history book will have the picture of it. And I said to the collections manager, I said, oh, I'd love to borrow that and show that at the Dennos sometime. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's being considered for the First Cities exhibition at the Metropolitan in New York, but if they don't take it, then maybe we can talk. Well, of course it's going to go to the First Cities exhibition at the Metropolitan. And I thought that was her nice way of saying no to me, rather than just no. Well, a few years later, I'm home in Wisconsin visiting my parents, and I go down to the library to check my email. And there's an email from the University of Pennsylvania. We're putting you had inquired about borrowing the Ram in the Thicket. We're putting our collection on tour again, and you're one of 4 museums that can have it. And the rental price was $100,000. Well, my God. I went to the president of the college and he said, well, if you can raise the money, you can do it. Well, this would be a really big deal for Traverse City. I mean, it's like the King Tut of Mesopotamian art. And so I went to the head of the Chamber of Commerce and Rotary Charities. We have a very wealthy Rotary Club in Traverse City, and the head of the Visitors and Convention Bureau, and I brought them all together in a room, and I said, here's an amazing opportunity for the Dennos and for the whole community to bring this to Traverse City. And if we market it right, it could be a great thing. And the then head of the Visitors Convention Bureau, this is at the time that we were in the war with the Iraqis. And she looked at me and she said, why would we want that stuff? We're at war with those people. The greatest disappointment of my whole career. So I didn't get the money to do the exhibition, but at least it was offered.
Mm-hmm. Which is quite an accomplishment.
You know, so I was happy about that. Well,
so the cradle of civilization, we don't want to be anywhere near that,
we
right?
don't want to be near that. But
the Tigris, the Euphrates, right there, right in the middle, right in the heart of it all.
Right, the heart of it all. But you know, every museum director has a frustration and disappointment in life. And
you're pretty successful up until that point.
And that was mine. But you know, the other part of the Dennos, besides the exhibitions, of course, is Millikan Auditorium. And when we opened, Jeff Haas came to me, Carl Haas's son, and wanted to start a jazz series at the museum in Millikan, and that kicked off very successfully and went on for a long time, a very successful series, and brought emerging jazz artists that are now regulars at the Blue Note in New York and so on. And of course, and there were other people who came along. Seamus Shinners wanted to do folk and blues, and we really started a wonderful series of concerts in that hall that continued to this day. But one of the big projects was a project that I had the good fortune to do with Bob James, the jazz pianist Bob James, who lives in Traverse City now. He was then in New York and Traverse City, both. And he had been telling me about a project where he had been invited to the Shanghai Conservatory of Music and met 5 students at the conservatory. He was brought into a room with them with a piano, but he, of course, didn't speak Mandarin, and they were shy with their English. So he just started playing the piano, and they left and came back with their traditional instruments and started playing along with him. And he was so taken by this that he did a project where he married his contemporary jazz group with these 5 kids playing traditional Chinese instruments. And he tells me about this, and I said, Bob, we have to bring this to the United States and premiere it in Millikan. And we did. I know Bob committed a huge amount of personal money to make this happen, but he brought it. We got some funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, but it was a pittance compared to. But he took it on tour to New York, and in the process, I went to New York for the final concerts, and after it was all over, everybody's all emotional. And I said to the kids, I said, if you ever do this in Shanghai, I promise I will come. Well, a year later, I get an email from Jack Lee, his Korean-born guitarist, saying, we're doing it in Shanghai, you said you would come. Now, this is in November of 2008. And I had been working with a gallery in New York on an exhibition of contemporary Chinese and Japanese ceramic art. And so I was excited to go back to China. We'd done some tourist trips there and so on, but I never thought I'd go back. And so I had the opportunity as a result to meet several of the artists, two of the artists who were going to be in that exhibition. One, Carolyn Chen in Shanghai, and another, Wan Lia in Beijing. And in the course of talking to Wan Lia, he said he was coming to Canada to do a residency at a community college. And I said, well, if you're coming to Canada, you're coming to Traverse City. And I got funding to bring him to do a residency in the art department. And this started a love affair with China that went on from 2008. I went back in 2010 to visit Juan, who we became very good friends. He stayed at our house for 2 weeks. And I went back to visit him and started seeing other artists from Korea and in China and other places. And thanks to the internet, what the internet did was make it as easy to work with an artist in Beijing or in Seoul as it was to work with an artist in Detroit. You know, it's a little further away, but, you know. And so that, at a time in my career when I needed a boost, you know, you get to that point where you just need something new, this afforded me an opportunity to venture into the world of contemporary art in Asia and in China, where it was emerging, the artists, you know, at that time, and had a wonderful, exciting time doing all of that. At the same time, or actually a little before, I was thinking we're building an art collection, and we're going to need new galleries for this, to show this. You can't build an art collection, and you can't improve an art collection unless you can show it to the public on a regular basis. So I went to Mike and Barb Dennos, and I said, you know, when we designed the original building, we did plan for where we could expand. And I said, I'd like you to help fund Bob Haldeman to make some more significant or complete drawings of what that expansion would look like. And they did. And at a planning meeting, we were doing some long-term planning work for the Dennos. I introduced these plans. I did them, this was kind of on the QT. Nobody knew about it other than Mike and Barb and Bob and I, this idea, because sometimes, you know, if you go through the bureaucracy, there's a whole lot of no's that come along with it, and I thought I had to have this no matter what. So I did it. I introduced it. There was a few surprise faces, but fortunately, one of the collectors, big collectors of Inuit art, or became big collectors of Inuit art in our area, very successful people, Barb and Dudley Smith, came to me a week later and said, we want to give you $1 million for the endowment, and when you're ready to build, come see us. And so I was happy with that. It went on, but by 2015, I didn't think this is really going to happen, and I thought it's probably time to wrap it up, and I told the president I'm going to retire. And he said, you can't retire, and I said, well, you know what I want. And so I'd already planned my retirement trip for a month in Morocco and Egypt and Greece and Cyprus, and I did take that as a sabbatical, jokingly. But Tim Nelson, who was president at the time, took this to heart. And I had met I'll think of it in a minute, Richard and Dinah Millock. And Dinah Millock was very interested in plans for the expansion of the museum. And over time, they became the big supporters of the idea of the expansion and gave $2 million to make it happen. And so I delayed my retirement and went on to expand the museum, 15,000 square feet for new permanent collection galleries, expanded both for the Inuit collection that was named for Barb and Dudley Smith, that wing, and Richard and Dinah Millock for the permanent, non-Inuit permanent collection, which are spectacular galleries, sort of modeled a bit after the New Whitney in New York, the Renzo Piano building. And so I was able to wrap up my career with that expansion.
And what year was the expansion opening?
The expansion opened in 2018, and then in about January of 2018, and then in June of 2019, I made it a career.
It's quite a story. And before you go, we have a couple minutes left. You had a couple of closing statements. Can you, your lines?
Oh, well, I guess, you know, I'd talk to your students tonight.
Yeah. Yep.
And I thought about what are the things in my career that, you know, sort of made it happen. And I've always been a risk taker, maybe sometimes more risk than what should, but you know, you decide to do something and then you figure out how you're going to make it work. And so I'm one who believes if you think about it too long, you'll never do it, you know? So figure it out. If you think it has potential, then try to make it work. If you don't ask, as we said earlier, you know, you're never going to get anywhere. You know, you make a ridiculous ask, like we could get the ram in the thicket, you know, but we did, or we had the opportunity. And throughout my career, I always tried to do more than just what's necessary to get the job done. If you're not pushing, you're never going to be more than average. And I've always felt when I was given the opportunity I was, you know, you've got to do as much as you can with it. And that's what I've always tried to do. And when you can't do it all on your own, then you have to find others to collaborate with. I had an opportunity to meet an artist, Sungmo Park, in Korea. I'd been invited to speak twice on museum development at a forum in South Korea. And one of my colleagues at the college had introduced me to the work she had seen on the internet of Korean artist Sungmo Park, who did these wire-wrap sculptures and layered screening that were amazing pieces. And when I had the opportunity to go to Korea to speak, I reached out and got to meet Sung Mo at his studio. He sent a car actually to pick me up from the airport and take me to his studio, and I wanted to do this exhibition with him, but why he wanted to come to Traverse City? What would he know about Traverse City and the Dennos? Well, as we're talking, I noticed he has a guitar in his studio, and he had a Korean with dreadlocks, which I thought was a pretty interesting thing. And I said to him, "Do you play?" And he said, "Yeah." And I thought, Bob James is big in Southeast Asia, plays at the Blue Note in Seoul and Japan and Tokyo and so on. And I said, "By chance, do you know the jazz pianist Bob James?" And he looked at me and he said, "You know Bob James?" And I said, yeah, he lives in Traverse City. And, "Oh, I saw him perform once. I bought his CD or an album, whatever at the time, and I walked up to him and he signed it, but I couldn't talk to him. I was so, you know." I said, "I can get him to play for your opening if we do this exhibit." And I had already known that I had Bob booked to play on the same night, so it wasn't quite like, you know, but that's all it took.
Gene, I have to tell you, this was great.
Yeah.
Perfect way to spend my morning.
Yeah.
I love it. And the other thing is, we're going to have you back because I know there's more to talk about. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
You took me right to the end. That was so perfect. And